I'm Tim Alamenciak, digital producer with TVO. I'm on the line with Dr. Ahmed El-Sohemy, an associate professor of nutritional sciences at the University of Toronto who researches gluten. He wrote a piece in Tuesday's Toronto Star headlined "Get a Celiac Test Before Giving Up Gluten" about the fad of gluten-free diets. Welcome, Dr. El-Sohemy.
Good afternoon.
So what prompted you to write this piece?
Well, I was invited to write the column in part based on some research that we recently published looking at the effects of gluten on individuals who do not have celiac disease. And the other reason is the fact that I'm often asked the question, should I be following a gluten-free diet? And you often hear about a lot of people going on a gluten-free diet, many celebrities that swear by it. And so we wanted to see if there's any evidence behind that.
So have you found any evidence behind that?
Well, sort of yes and no. We did not look specifically at what some have described as non-celiac gluten sensitivity. These are people who describe a variety of symptoms associated primarily with gastrointestinal problems. But what we did do is look at a variety of blood markers. And we found that there was a particular marker that's linked with inflammation that seemed to be higher in some people who consume a lot of gluten. We just don't know if that's associated with any adverse health effects.
Right, and is that the bit that you mentioned in the article about 2 large plates of pasta per day being the kind of diet that would cause that?
Right. Well, for those who undergo a blood test for celiac disease, which is really the only well-characterized and well-known type of gluten intolerance, you need to be consuming adequate amounts or a good amount of gluten-containing foods. Like I said, basically a plate of pasta, several slices of bread on a daily basis in order to be able to get a positive blood test if in fact you do have celiac disease.
So what about this ever-present argument, I know I can't tolerate gluten because I feel better now that I don't eat it anymore, and I feel bad if I have a slice of bread?
Right. Well, a lot of those people basically feel better. Cut out the carbs, right? I mean, if you cut out a lot of white bread and heaping plates, you probably are going to lose weight, and you're probably going to feel better in a lot of ways. So, if it makes you feel better, by all means, continue. But a lot of gluten-containing foods are really good sources of essential vitamins, minerals, and are good sources of fiber. So if you're up to it and you want to know if it's precisely the gluten that's causing any harm or the fact that you're just eating too much carbs, you may want to introduce some of the gluten-containing foods as a trial. And if it still makes you feel unpleasant or is causing any kind of ill effects, then cut it out.
So are there any risks to avoiding gluten in your diet?
Well, I think if you're going to go on a kind of a gluten-free diet, there are a couple of things to consider. One is cost. We know that gluten-free foods typically cost up to double as the price of their gluten-containing counterparts. They tend not to taste as nice. But interestingly, they actually tend to have a poorer nutritional profile. And they tend to be made with other types of starches, mainly rice or tapioca, that are actually rapidly digested and may cause other adverse health effects. We know that the bacteria have health promoting properties. It tends to shift to an unfavorable profile. So the short answer is yes. A strict gluten-free diet, if you're switching the foods, may not be doing you much good if you don't have celiac disease.
So what does the fad mean for celiac sufferers? Do they benefit from an increased amount of gluten-free options on the market?
Absolutely. I think they certainly benefit. And I've spoken to a few people with celiac disease who, as much as they, they wonder about this whole gluten-free craze, they are pleased to see greater availability and variety of gluten-free foods. We also know that a large number of individuals with celiac disease remain undiagnosed. So if anything, if this whole craze has brought greater awareness, namely through increased screening, patients, if it prompts more individuals to go to their physician to get a blood test or to get a genetic test to see if they even have the gene that's required to get celiac disease, then I think it's done some good.
But are there any risks? Say a server at a restaurant thinks that a person with celiac disease is just being picky or following a fad diet.
Well, I think individuals with celiac disease are already very mindful of avoiding gluten. And so I think they're fairly well aware of the types of precautions they take when they eat out at various restaurants. So I think, if anything, the fact that some are increasing the variety of foods that are available, I think that could be helpful to those with celiac disease.
So we touched on this before, but what advice would you have for someone who has, say, declared themselves to be gluten intolerant and has cut gluten out of their life? What advice would you have for them now?
I mean, if they've cut out the gluten and they feel much better and they're happier with what the current diet is, then I say stick with it. But if they really want to know if they have a genuine gluten intolerance, they may want to slowly reintroduce some foods that do contain gluten to see whether or not that does cause any harm. And that'll help them determine if it was in fact the gluten or if it was the fact that they really just cut out a lot of carbs from their diet.
And to follow on that, is there a risk that by doing that there could be some sort of a nocebo effect or placebo effect?
Well, again, it's really up to the individual to give it a try. I mean, it's important to know that gluten does lurk in all kinds of unusual places. A lot of people are surprised to hear that soy sauce contains gluten. If you look at the ingredient list of something like veggie dogs, I think gluten is the first or second ingredient on that list. So again, it's important to either work with a registered dietitian or perhaps a naturopath who can help you identify the foods that are truly gluten-free. And if it's a processed food, again, it's important to determine that the food itself was not processed in a facility that does process other foods that do contain gluten, because there can be that kind of cross-contamination.
All right, Dr. El-Sohemy, thank you very much for joining us here on TVO.org.
My pleasure. Thank you.